My name is Nora Velland, and I am 44 years old. 6 weeks ago, at my father's 75th birthday dinner, he told my 12-year-old daughter that her mother had never amounted to anything, that I had wasted every advantage I had been given, and that she should learn from my example what not to do with a life. He said this at the table, with 7 people present, in the specific tone of a man who believes he is offering a useful lesson rather than delivering a wound. My daughter, whose name is Iris and who is 12 years old and who has her grandmother's eyes and my organizational instincts, reached into the canvas bag she brings everywhere, pulled out a printed document, and slid it across the table to him without saying a word. The document was a profile that Forbes magazine had published about my company 14 months earlier. She had printed it herself at school on a Tuesday, and she had been carrying it in that bag for 6 weeks, since the last time my father had said something about me in her presence that she had decided required a response. She had not told me she was carrying it. I did not know she had done any of this until he picked it up and read the first paragraph, and the table went completely silent. Before I tell you what he said when he put it down, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I want to know where you are. Now let me take you back 37 years to a house in Portland, Oregon, and explain what kind of man my father is and what kind of daughter that made me. My father, Roland Velland, is a man of genuine accomplishment and genuine smallness, and I have spent 44 years learning to hold both of those things about him without letting either one cancel the other. He built a civil engineering firm in Portland, starting in 1978, and ran it for 30 years and sold it in 2008 for a number that allowed him to retire comfortably and to continue, in retirement, the primary occupation he had always found most satisfying, which was the assessment of other people's decisions relative to his own. He is not a stupid man. He is not an unkind man in the global sense. He coached my brother's soccer team for 3 years, and he remembers the names of his neighbors' children, and he has contributed reliably to the same 3 charities since 1990. These things are real. They coexist with the other things, which are also real, and which I am going to describe with the same precision I use to describe everything. Because his precision is the only way I know to be fair to a complicated person without excusing the specific things that are not excusable. My father believes, with the settled certainty of someone who has never once had cause to revise this belief, that the measure of a life is the scale of the thing you build, and that scale is measured in revenue and headcount and industry recognition, and that these measurements apply to men and are interesting in women primarily as evidence of a woman's relationship to a man who built something. He did not state this belief in those terms because he did not need to. It operated as the atmosphere of our household, the thing you breathed rather than the thing you discussed. I breathed it for 18 years and left for college and spent the next 26 years building something he could not categorize, which is the part of the story I will get to when the foundation is laid. My mother, Carol, was a graphic designer who ran her own studio from the spare bedroom of our house for 22 years. She designed packaging and print materials and, later, websites, and she was extraordinarily good at it in the specific way of someone who has refined a skill over decades without the benefit of external validation, because the external validation in our house was distributed unevenly and in a direction that did not point at Carol Velland's studio. My father referred to her work as her projects, which is a word that sounds like support and functions as diminishment, and my mother received this the way she received most things from my father, which was with a patience that I spent a long time mistaking for acceptance, and that I eventually understood was a different thing, a kind of strategic endurance that allowed her to keep doing the work she loved in the space she had available, without spending her energy on a negotiation she had already concluded was not winnable. She died in 2019. She did not live to see the Forbes profile. She would have framed it. which is a thing I know without uncertainty because I know who she was, and the knowing of that is its own particular kind of grief, the kind that arrives not in the early days, but in the specific moments when you understand precisely what someone would have done if they had been there to do it. My brother Todd is 2 years older than me and is a structural engineer who joined my father's firm at 24 and stayed until my father sold it, and who now consults independently, and who is a good person with a blind spot the exact shape and size of Roland Bellin's approval, which is to say that Todd has spent his life inside the system my father built, and inside that system he is legible and valued, and he has never had to develop the particular skills that come from being outside it. I do not say this with resentment. Todd was dealt a different hand in the same house, and he played it the way it made sense to play it. And I was dealt a different hand, and I played mine, and neither of us chose the cards. The difference between us that is relevant to this story is that Todd has spent 46 years being the version of a Vellin child that my father recognizes, and I have spent 44 years being the version he has never quite been able to read. And not being readable to my father has cost me things and given me things in roughly equal and opposite measure. And I have made my peace with the accounting. I left Portland at 18 for the University of Michigan on a merit scholarship that covered most of my tuition, and that my father mentioned at my graduation party had been less competitive than the scholarship Todd had received to Oregon State, which was offered by a program that was in a different field, and was therefore not a comparable measurement. Though I did not say this at the time because I was 18, and I was leaving in 3 days, and the leaving was more important than the argument. I studied information systems because the early 90s were the moment when anyone paying attention could see that information was becoming the primary infrastructure of everything else, and I was paying attention. And I had the specific advantage of someone who has never been certain the existing map is accurate, which is to say I was willing to go in a direction that was not yet a road. I graduated in 1998, moved to San Francisco, worked for 2 companies that no longer exist as those companies, learned everything both of them knew about building and scaling software, and started my own company in 2003 with $11,000 in savings, and a co-founder named Priya who had the technical architecture expertise that I lacked, and whose judgment I trusted then and trust now, 21 years later, with the same completeness. The company, which I will not name here because this story is not about promoting it, but about what was built and why, provides data infrastructure tools for healthcare organizations. It is not a glamorous category. It is the category of thing that keeps medical records from being lost, and lab results from being misrouted, and billing systems from generating errors that cost hospitals money and cost patients confusion and time. It is the kind of thing that matters in the way that plumbing matters, which is completely and invisibly until it does not work, at which point it is the only thing that matters. We have been profitable since 2007. We have 214 employees. The Forbes profile ran 14 months ago, under a headline I had nothing to do with writing and that I found somewhat overstate, but that Priya read aloud to me in our conference room and then framed and hung on the wall behind my desk. I left there because Priya's judgment is reliable and because the wall behind my desk was otherwise empty. My father read the Forbes profile when it was published. I know this because he called me the day it appeared online and said, in the voice he uses when he is recalibrating his position, that he had not realized the company had gotten that large. I said we had been at that scale for several years. He said he had not been following closely. I said I understood. He said it was impressive, using the word the way you use a word when you are surprised to need it. I said thank you. We talked for 11 more minutes about Todd's consulting work and my father's retirement schedule and a trip he was planning to Portugal. And then we said goodbye, and I sat at my desk for a moment, and I thought about the word impressive and what it had taken to produce it from him and what it was worth now that it had arrived, and I concluded that it was worth something, and not very much, and both of those things were true at the same time, which is a calculation I have been running on my father's approval since I was approximately 9 years old, and which I have never arrived at a different answer for. I told Iris about the call that evening. She was 11 then. She asked what he had said. I told her he had said it was impressive. She asked if that was the first time he had said something like that. I said it was the first time about the company. She was quiet for a moment. She said that seemed late. I said it was, and that it was also his timing and not mine, and that I had not been waiting for it. She looked at me with the specific evaluating look she has been giving me since she was 4 years old, the one that means she is deciding whether to believe the thing I just said. She nodded. She went to do her homework. I thought about that nod for the rest of the evening. I want to stop here because there is something I need to ask you before this story goes any further. Has your child ever understood something about your life that you had not yet finished understanding yourself? Has someone who loves you ever seen the gap between what you were told you were and what you actually built, and found the gap so obvious they could not explain why anyone had missed it? Tell me in the comments. I read every word. And please subscribe now if you have not already, because Iris, carrying that Forbes profile in her bag for 6 weeks before she needed it, is the part of this story I have thought about every day since it happened. And I have not finished thinking about it, and I think you need to hear the rest. My father's 75th birthday dinner was a Sunday in late September. My brother had organized it, which meant it was at a restaurant Todd chose in the Pearl District that was expensive and good, and that my father approved of because it was the kind of place where the menu did not list prices, which he has always considered a sign of seriousness. There were 8 of us: Todd and his wife Margot, my father's sister, Aunt Patricia, who is 71 and who has spent 50 years being the person in the room, who laughs at my father's jokes quickly enough that no one has to notice whether the joke was funny. Todd's 2 adult children, my cousins Nathan and Bev, who are both in their mid-20s and who work in industries my father considers legitimate, and me and Iris. Iris's father and I divorced when she was 4, and he lives in Austin, and he is a good parent at a geographic distance, and the relevant fact about that for this story is simply that Iris came to the dinner with me, as she comes to most family events with me, and that she was carrying her canvas bag, as she carries it most places, and that I did not think to wonder what was in it, because it is always full of things, and I had learned years ago that Iris's bag is her business. The dinner was what my father's dinners are, which is to say it was organized around him and his history and his accomplishments. Which is not a criticism, because organizing a 75th birthday dinner around the person turning 75 is correct. And my father's accomplishments are real, and the dinner was appropriate. He talked about the firm. He talked about the Portugal trip. He talked about a documentary he had watched about infrastructure projects in Southeast Asia that he found relevant to his own professional history in ways he explained at length. Todd contributed to these sections of the conversation with the ease of someone who has been having this conversation. For 40 years, Margot was warm and attentive. Patricia laughed at the right moments. Nathan and Bev asked good questions. I participated in the way I participate in these dinners, which is present and competent and occupying slightly less space than the room technically allowed me, which is a habit I developed young and have never fully stopped performing in that specific context, regardless of what I know about myself in every other context. Iris sat beside me. She ate her dinner and she listened and she asked appropriate questions, and she was, as she usually is in public situations, 2 increments more composed than her age requires. The conversation about me started the way these conversations always start with my father, which is sideways, through a general observation that has a specific target. He was talking about Nathan's decision to leave a corporate job and start a consulting practice, which he was praising, and he said that He respected people who built something with their own hands rather than waiting for someone else to create the opportunity for them. And then he looked at me with a particular expression and said that not everyone was cut out for that kind of risk, and that Nora had always been more comfortable in a supporting role, which was fine. There was nothing wrong with that. Not everyone was built to lead. I felt the table adjust, not dramatically. The specific small adjustment of people who have heard this register before and are deciding whether to engage with it. Todd looked at his wine. Margot looked at me. Aunt Patricia prepared a laugh. I was about to say something. I had several options available, none of them satisfying. When my father continued, he said he hoped Iris was watching and learning, that young women who grew up watching their mothers settle into comfortable second-tier position sometimes had a harder time understanding their own potential because you became what you saw, and that he wanted more for Iris than what my example offered. He said this in the tone of a man issuing a concerned observation. He said this about me to my daughter, at the table, with Margot and Todd and Patricia and Nathan and Bev, all sitting there with their various levels of willingness to stop it, and none of them stopping. Iris did not look at me. I noticed this specifically, that she did not check my face first, which children typically do when they are deciding how to respond to something that involves their parent. She had already decided. She reached into her canvas bag, which was hanging on the back of her chair, and she produced a folded document. A printout on regular paper that had been folded twice to fit in the bag, and she unfolded it with the deliberate care of someone who has rehearsed this movement, which I later confirmed she had, and she slid it across the table to my father. She did not say anything. She just slid it to him. He looked at it. He looked at the Forbes logo at the top of the page. He read the headline, which I will not repeat here, because this is not a promotional document, but which named me by name and described my company in terms that were, as I said, somewhat overstated and entirely accurate. He read the first paragraph. The table was silent in the way a table goes silent when something has happened that everyone is processing differently, and no one knows yet what the correct response is. He set the document down. He looked at Iris. He said, and these are his exact words, "Where did you get this?" She said, "At school." She said she had printed it on a Tuesday because she wanted to have it. He looked at me. I looked at him. I said nothing. He looked back at Iris and he said that he had not meant to suggest her mother was not successful. Iris looked at him with the evaluating look, the one she gave me after the phone call, and she said, without any particular heat, that it had sounded like that. He did not say anything for 4 seconds. I counted. Then he picked up his wine glass and he took a drink and he said, to the table generally, that the halibut was very good, and the dinner continued. Before I tell you what happened after dinner, what Iris said to me in the car on the way home, and what my father did in the 2 weeks following, and what I finally said to him on the phone in October, I want to stop here and be precise about something. My daughter defending me was not the point. I want to be clear about that because I think the easiest version of this story is the version where the 12-year-old hero hands the villain the evidence and the villain is defeated. And I am telling you that is not what happened, and it is not what I wanted to happen. What I had wanted for 44 years was not a defense and not a defeat. It was something harder to name and closer to what I have spent my professional life learning to build, which is a system that works correctly without requiring constant intervention to maintain it. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been defended by someone who loved you in a way you were not ready for and did not know what to do with. Tell me if you have been in a car driving home from something and not had the words. Subscribe if you have not already, because what Iris said to me in that car is the part that changed the whole shape of the story for me, and I do not want you to miss it. In the car, Iris was quiet for the first 4 minutes, which is the amount of time it takes to get from the restaurant's parking structure to the on-ramp for the bridge. Then she said she was sorry if she had made it weird. I said she had not made it weird, that it had been weird, and that she had made it accurate. She was quiet for another moment, and then she said she had been wanting to do that for a long time. I asked her how long she had been carrying the printout. She said 6 weeks, since the last dinner in August, when my father had made a comment about my career that she had overheard. I had not known she had overheard that comment. I had not known she was tracking these comments. I pulled the car over at a turnout on the bridge approach, not dramatically, just to be stopped when I said the next thing. I said that I needed her to understand something about my father and about me and about what she had just done. She turned to look at me in the dark car with the bridge lights starting up ahead, and she said, "All right." I said that my father had been measuring me against a standard he designed since I was her age, and that the standard was not fair and was not accurate, and was not going to change because a Forbes profile landed on the table in front of him. I said that his opinion of me had never been what I built my life around, which was true, and that his opinion of me still had the capacity to hurt me, which was also true, and that both of those things could be true without one of them canceling the other. She said she knew. I said I was glad she had done what she had done. She said she had been waiting for the right moment. I said she had found it. She said she thought Grandpa looked surprised. I said I thought he had been. We sat there for another minute, and then I pulled back onto the road, and we drove home, and I made tea, and she did her homework, and I sat at the kitchen table for a while after she went to bed, thinking about the specific fact of a 12-year-old printing a document at school on a Tuesday and folding it into her bag and carrying it for 6 weeks against the eventual need. My father called me on a Thursday, 11 days after the dinner. I saw his name on my phone, and I let it ring 3 times before I answered, not to make a point, just to have 3 rings of time. He said he had been thinking. I said I was listening. He said he thought he had been unfair to me over the years. He said this slowly, in the voice of someone choosing words with more care than usual, which, from my father, was the closest available indicator of seriousness. He said he did not think he had ever given proper weight to what I had built. I said that was accurate. He said he was not sure how to give proper weight to something he had not followed closely, and that he would like to follow it more closely if I was willing to let him. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about what willing meant in this context, and what it would cost, and what it would produce, and whether the accounting came out to something I was prepared to pay. Then I said I was willing to try that, and that trying meant I would tell him about the work when there was something to tell, and that he needed to receive what I told him as information about something real rather than as an opportunity to measure it against something else. He said he understood. I believed him partially. Partialies was enough to start with. We talked for 22 more minutes, and he asked 3 specific questions about the company that were good questions. The kind that come from someone who has actually been thinking about the subject rather than assembling questions to fill time. And I answered them, and we said goodbye, and I sat at my desk, and I thought about 22 minutes of good questions and what they were worth, and I arrived at the same calculation I always arrive at with my father, which is something and not very much and more than I had last time. Iris asked me the following week what Grandpa had said. I told her he had called and that we had talked. She asked if he had apologized. I said he had been unfair. She considered this. She said that was not exactly an apology. I said she was right, that it was not exactly an apology, and that it was also not nothing, and that I had decided to work with it. She nodded. The evaluating nod, the one I have been receiving from her since she was 4, and that I have come to understand means she has processed what I said, and has not fully concluded whether she agrees, but she is wishing. I said I wanted to tell her something about what she had done at the dinner, and she said, okay. I said that carrying that document in her bag for 6 weeks was the most specific act of love anyone had ever done for me. I said this carefully because I meant it, and because the word love in this context was the precise word, and I do not use precise words carelessly. She looked at me for a moment. She said she had not thought of it as love. She had thought of it as evidence. I said that in our family, those were the same thing. She smiled at that, a small and genuine smile, and then she said she had another copy at home in case she needed it again. I said I hoped she would not need it again. She said she thought she probably would. She was right. She usually is. I want to say something about the Forbes profile itself before I close, because it exists in this story as a document and documents deserve accuracy. I did not pursue the profile. A journalist reached out through our press contact, and Priya said she thought we should do it. And I said I would think about it, and I thought about it for 3 weeks. And I agreed because Priya's judgment is reliable, and because I had spent 20 years building something real, and I had arrived, at the age of 43, with enough clarity about my own work to describe it to someone and not need the description to be more than it was. The profile ran at 1,200 words. It described the company accurately. It described me as a founder who had operated largely outside the traditional funding and recognition structures of the technology industry, which is true, and which was my choice, not my limitation, and which the journalist understood as a distinction worth making. My father read it and called it impressive. My daughter read it and printed it on a Tuesday and put it in her bag and waited. The difference between those two responses is the difference between someone who measures things and someone who understands them. And I will not tell you which response I valued more because I think you already know. I will tell you that the Forbes profile is no longer on the wall behind my desk. Priya moved it when we rearranged the office in August. It is in a file folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. The copy my daughter printed is on the refrigerator in our kitchen, held up by a magnet shaped like a pineapple that Iris bought at a gift shop when she was 7, and it has been there since she put it up the morning after the dinner, and I have not taken it down, and I do not intend to. I want to say something about the years between leaving Portland and starting the company, because those years are the foundation, and the foundation deserves to be described. After I left my second job in San Francisco in 2002, I spent 4 months in a studio apartment in the Sunset District, with my savings and a whiteboard and the particular clarity that comes from having learned 2 different companies' approaches to the same set of problems, and having concluded that neither approach was right. Priya and I had met at the second company. She was a senior engineer, and I was running product, and we had spent 18 months disagreeing productively about the architecture of a system that we both knew was being built incorrectly. And when the company was acquired and the acquirer made the predictable decisions about the engineering team, we both left within the same month, and we called each other, and I said I had an idea, and she said she had been waiting for me to say that. The idea was simple in the way that ideas are simple when they are correct, which is that it takes about 30 seconds to explain and about a decade to build. And the explanation is not the hard part. The hard part is the decade, and the decade was 4 months in a studio apartment, and then a second bedroom in a rented office, and then a real office, and then a larger real office, and then 214 people, and a healthcare system in 7 states, and a profile in a magazine that my daughter printed on a Tuesday and carried in her bag for 6 weeks. The decade was also the year my mother was sick, and I flew home 7 times in 11 months and ran the company from my parents' kitchen table at night after she went to sleep, and my father passed through that kitchen table twice and said very little about either thing, the company or the illness, because he has never been a man who knows what to do with things that are happening outside the frame he built to look at the world. I do not say this with anger. I say it with the accuracy I owe a complicated person. He loved my mother. He did not know how to love her in the ways the specific situation required, and the not knowing was real even if the love was also real. And I watched both of those things occupy the same space for the 11 months she was sick, and I stored all of it in the same place I store everything, which is precisely without editorial, available for retrieval when the retrieval becomes relevant. My mother died in the first week of March in 2019. I was with her. My father was there. Todd was there. We stood in a room that had the particular quality of rooms where something irreversible has just happened. Very still and very loud in the way that silence is loud when it has replaced something that will not come back. My father took my hand in that room, briefly, without saying anything, and it was the most direct thing he had offered me in 40 years, and I held it for the few seconds it lasted, and then he moved away, and we all moved out of the room and into the rest of our lives. And I went back to San Francisco, and I sat at my desk, and I worked, because working is what I know how to do with things that are too large to hold, still. What I understand now, 6 weeks after the dinner and 21 years after starting the company, is that the Forbes profile was never the point. The profile was a piece of paper, well-produced and accurate, and ultimately a description of a thing rather than the thing itself. The thing itself is 214 people whose salaries are paid reliably and whose work is real and whose output affects the accuracy of medical information for people they will never meet. And the thing itself is Priya in the conference room, reading the headline aloud and then framing it, and the thing itself is my daughter printing a copy on a Tuesday at the age of 11, and deciding, with a completeness I still find remarkable, that it was worth carrying in case it was needed. The thing itself is also my father taking my hand in a hospital room in 2019 and not finding the words, which is also a real thing and not the only real thing, and which I have held carefully next to all the other real things without deciding that one of them invalidates another. I am 44 years old. I have been building for 21 years. I have been my father's daughter for 44 years, which is the longer project and the less predictable one, and the one I am still in the middle of, and I have Iris beside me in it, which means the project has someone in it with better instincts than mine for knowing when the moment is right, and what to hand across the table when it arrives. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. Iris asked me last week if I thought Grandpa had actually changed. I said I thought he had shifted, which was different and more honest. She said she understood the difference. She said she thought a shift was something to work with. I said I agreed. She said she had printed a second copy of the profile just in case, and she was keeping it at her father's house in Austin because you never knew when you might need it in a different city. I told her that was excellent planning. She said she had learned it from somewhere. She was not wrong about that either. She usually is not. Priya called me the morning after the dinner. She had not been there, but she has known me for 21 years, and she has a specific radar for when something has happened that I have not yet processed fully. And she called at 8 in the morning, which is earlier than she usually calls, with the tone of someone who has been thinking about calling since the previous evening. I told her what happened. She listened without interrupting, which she does when she is paying her fullest attention, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she said that Iris sounded like someone she wanted to hire in about 12 years. I laughed, which I had not done about any of it yet, and the laughing settled something in me that had been sitting at the wrong angle since the previous night. Priya said she was glad the profile had been useful for something beyond the wall behind my desk. I said I was glad, too. She said she thought I should call my father. I said I was going to wait for him to call me. She said she thought that was right. She is almost always right, which is one of the primary reasons the company works. And one of the primary reasons I have never once in 21 years considered what the business would look like without her. Because it would not look like itself, the same way that a building with its structural columns removed does not look like a building with something missing. It looks like a different thing entirely, and not a better one. My father called 11 days later, as I described. He asked good questions. I answered them. The accounting came out to something, and not very much and more than last time. which is the consistent result of 26 years of running the same calculation, and which I have decided to receive as a kind of progress rather than as an insufficiency, because the alternative is to wait for a different result from a formula that does not produce one. And I am 44 years old, and I have a company and a daughter, and work to do. And I am no longer interested in waiting for results that the available variables cannot produce. I am interested in the results that are actually available, which are imperfect and partial and real, and I know how to build with imperfect and partial and real materials, because that is what every company is made of, and every family and every relationship between a complicated parent and the person they made who turned out to be someone they did not fully anticipate. You work with what is there. You document what you build. And sometimes someone you love prints the documentation on a Tuesdays at school and carries it in a bag for 6 weeks against the day it is needed. And on that day, you understand something about being seen that all the Forbes profiles in the world cannot produce on their own. That is the part that matters. That is the part I am keeping. If you have ever built something that the people closest to you were the last to see, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what they finally saw and when. Tell me what it cost to wait. And if someone who loves you has ever seen you more clearly than you were seeing yourself, tell me that too. Subscribe if you have not already and check the link in the description. There is more there. I will be here.